My name is Patty Letsky, and I am the product manager for both Arbortext and for Service Information Manager and Service Parts. So I'll be talking about what's new with both of those. First off, I will some that was released earlier this year, just to give you kind of a reminder of what we did previously. So around the June timeframe, we released our Arbortext 7.1 M50, and at the time it was called APP 11.2 M50. Primarily, this was for customer critical bug fixes, but we did also update the Creo View plugin to be the 5.1 version. And this was the first release where our Arbortext products were no longer shipping with the JRE. And I imagine many of you have heard about Oracle's change to their support policy. So PTC is no longer able to ship the JRE, so you have to obtain it from Oracle in order to use Arbortext. And Arbortext 7.1 M50 works with version 8 of Java. And we also added this environment variable just to make it a little easier to specify where your JRE has been installed. This is especially helpful if you have multiple JREs on your system. Also, in the June timeframe, the Service Information Manager and Service Parts release 11.2 came out. A couple of highlights to mention regarding that. One is a change to the licensing, and this really isn't necessarily specific to that release, but just a change that's happened recently, where in the past there were separate licenses for Service Information Manager and Service Parts. Going forward, we have a new license called Service Parts Information and Instructions, and so that will include all that used to be in SIM and Service Parts. Exception, it has to do with the BOM transformation piece, which is part of a separate module called BOM transformation going forward. Another new feature for SIM publishing is that the release toggle can now be settable at the container level. So what's nice about this is that if you're working with multiple Arbortext content delivery, which used to be called in-service systems, and they are at different levels, you're able to have different products publishing to these different Arbortext content delivery systems. In the past, it was one XCOM property that covered the entire system. Now it's that's settable at the container level also. Another feature is that for SIM publishing, there was an issue where if your Windchill server had been rehosted and you were doing this bundle publishing to ACD, that essentially it would require a full publish because it would see that the server was different and think that everything had changed. And so now we've got a setting that you can specify. Say this has been rehosted. This was what the previous server name was, and so that way you can continue doing incremental publishing without requiring a full publish just because you have been rehosted. On Service Information Manager, so the next release is expected to come out at in the December timeframe. A couple of new features here. One has to do with SIM translation, where in the past, if there was an issue with a missing attribute translation, so this is related to the translation dictionaries and XLIF, for those of you that are familiar with it, when you would do a SIM publish, it would only list the first missing attribute, which of course can get very frustrating. So now, if there are any attributes missing, you will get the complete list to address all the issues at that time. A few other items that we're doing. Again, in-service changed its name, so the new name will be Arbortext Content Delivery. So we have a few places where we'll be reflecting that, particularly in the delivery content report. There have been a number of publishing performance improvements done. And then the license tracking. Previously, we weren't tracking all of the relevant actions, and now if you're monitoring your SIM system, you will be able to see a more complete of the license usage. Of course, since it's due out in December, we have to say subject to change without notice. Okay, on to Arbortext 8. So this is our release that's due out hopefully later this week, possibly next week, hopefully later this week. Here are some of the features that we're adding to Arbortext 8. And I have some additional information on most of these items that I'll get to in a sec. Is support for audio and video in XML editing. The next is that we're going to have a separate installer for Help Center. So rather than one installer that does and Help Center, we'll have two separate installers, which gives you additional flexibility. We have new application icons that you can see off to the right here. Top one is the new icon for Arbortext Editor, the lower one for Styler. So the uppercase A with the pencil is going away in favor of these green icons that are more in line with other PTC products. ReadOnly plugin is now updated to the 6.0 version. We've had some customer requests, one about improvements to notations editing, and one about the ability to set all topics as read-only. So if you're in Service Information Manager and you say open all topics in Editor, if you prefer, that can be read-only. Are deprecating support for Editor running as an ActiveX control. So this would be that Arbortext Editor embed protocol. Starting with Arbortext 8, deprecated. Now this doesn't affect the ability to use ActiveX controls in Arbortext Editor if you're including other programs. It's just about the ability to run Editor inside a web page. Essentially, various changes that Microsoft has done in the operating system made this so difficult to maintain that deprecating it. Then finally, we are upgrading now to Java 11. So where the 7.1 stream will continue with Java 8, our 8.0 stream is now going to use Java 11. Well, forward-looking information, that's true, but hopefully we are very close to release. Let's go into more detail on these particular items. First is the support for audio and video in the XML content. So we've always had the ability to double-click. If you've got a graphic that's an audio or a video file, it would open in the player associated to it. So in this screenshot, I'm showing the just the Windows Media Player. So where this previously worked with file system objects, now it'll also work with videos that are stored in Windchill or that are accessed via HTTP references. HTTP reference does have to be a link to a file. So if you've got like a link to some website that's a player, that won't work. But if it's a link to a file, then it'll open just as though it were a local file. My little screenshot is just showing a web server serving up a audio file and that it opens up in, like I said, Windows Player. change has to do with the Help Center installer. So again, in the past, when you would install Editor, you were also installing Editor. But now you have the option. You can just install Editor, choose to use the Help Center that's always available at the PTC.com support site. And you also, some customers may choose to put the Help Center, say, on a shared location so that each person doesn't necessarily have to install Help Center themselves. But if you prefer, of course, you can just put them both on your local machine. It would just be a separate installation. When you do run this Help Center installer, there'll be an option as to whether you want to include the programmer's guides or not, and whether you want to include the localized version of Help Center or not. This, as I said, was a request from a customer regarding notation editing. And essentially, in our notation editing dialog box, we've just much clearer as far as which notations are defined in the DTD. Those that are defined in the DTD are read-only in this notations dialog box. And of course, those have to be modified actually in the DTD. So if you've declared notations that are specific to this document, you can modify them. If they're defined in the DTD, then they're read-only. This was a customer request. Some customers who, when they would be in Service Information Manager, they wanted to open all the topics, say, in a publication section. They didn't want it to be an editable view. They wanted just a read-only view of all the topics so they could sort of see the flow. And then if they wanted to edit the topics, they would just open them one at a time. So there's a new adapter setting, the siteprefs.xml, pubstruct RDE read-only. If you set that as read-only, when you do the action that's open all topics in Arbortext Editor, even if it's checked out to you, it'll still be read-only. And in this screenshot, you can see the first topic of this section actually is checked out to me, but it still will be read-only in the edit view. This is my last slide. I'll turn it over now to Simon Taylor, who can talk about changes in our Arbortext layout developer.
Thank you, Patty. Do you need to let me share? Cool. Hello, everybody. I will share my screen now. I'm going to talk about the new features and functionality which we're providing in Layout Developer 12.0. First thing you'll notice, I'll talk about the agenda first. So we're going to have a look at the new name. We'll have a look at the changes to the interface that we've made and a couple of the new features that we're providing in this release. There's some quite big new features in here as well as some minor ones which we'll talk about later on. So as I was going to say, the first thing you'll notice is that we've got a new name for Advanced Print Publisher. We're now calling it Layout Developer. Now the main reason behind this, the main driver for it, is the fact that people used to get Advanced Print Publisher confused with Publishing Engine. The names were very similar and it sounded like you could either have one or the other. Well, that's not really what Layout Developer is about. Layout Developer is more of a template development tool and a document sort of finishing kind of tool, desktop publishing kind of tool, rather than a publishing engine replacement. So we wanted to make that clear. As far as the features and functionality which are in Layout Developer, they're exactly the same as what was in Advanced Print Publisher. There's no changes to that, or the pricing or licensing or anything like that. It's just a name change and an icon change, like Patty So for editor and styler, we got a new icon, a new color scheme for layout developer as well. You'll still hear the phrase APP used, and we'll use that to describe the composition engine that's inside publishing engine. If we changed it there, we would have to make so many changes it would be ridiculous. So to keep the two separate, we're calling the engine that's inside publishing engine APP, but the desktop tool we're calling layout developer. You'll also hear me say 3B2, but then I've been using the product for 25 odd years, and it's really hard habit to break. Hopefully I won't say that anymore. We'll just call it layout developer. So that's that bit. As we got a new version, 12.0.0.0, and we're giving it a new name, we've updated the interface a little bit. So the first thing that people will notice is the new toolbar. The old toolbars have been around for a long time, probably since about version 8. They haven't changed. So for this release, we've come up with a new main toolbar with the most sort of commonly used features and tasks, certainly the ones that I use the most, in there and grouped together to make it more of a sort of usable tool than it was before. The icons are a lot more pretty than they were before. You can still use your hand-drawn versions if you like, but now you can make use of PNG icons in your toolbars if you want things which look a lot better. We've also introduced schemes to cope with the grayed out icon options, as well as the mouse over and the selected icons backgrounds, which kind of apply a mask to the PNGs to make them look different. So hopefully you'll agree that that makes things look a lot nicer. Hand in hand with that, we've updated the menu system. There were a lot of menus in the old version of APP which were redundant, like the HTML and XML menus. So we've taken it upon ourselves to reorganize the menu system. The vast majority of things are still there, they're just in a different place, and we're providing in the new feature documentation for the product, we've got a list of where everything is so you can find it easily enough. It won't take long before you're used to that menu system. If you really don't like it and you want to go back to the way things were, there is an option to reinstate everything the way it was, and that's a sort of system preference. We've also done some work on our application and document configuration dialogues, application preferences and document preferences, just to try to make them a bit more usable. So they're now grouped with the items in there are now grouped within categories, rather than having all those multicolored tabs that we had before. So hopefully you'll find that as more usable as well, and easier to find the bits that you want to configure in your application and inside your document. That thing, those configuration dialog box, you are hardwired in there. You can't revert back to the old ones, unfortunately, but the menus and the toolbars you certainly can if you want to. So the big sort of layout feature that we're rolling out in this release is support for OpenType font feature tables. Now, this has been on my list of things to do for probably the best part of 10 years, and so we finally got around to doing it in this release. OpenType fonts are very powerful versions of fonts, and they contain a lot of extra information in them to allow composition systems to display text a lot more nicely. These are sort of further on than from TrueType font sort of tables. They include things like dynamic ligatures, small cap versions, how to display fractions, how to display digits in different ways, how to display, quite importantly, language information in different ways. So Arabic, Hebrew, Hindi, Chinese, Japanese and Korean information, Thai information. There's over 100 different tables inside your OpenType fonts which provide information based on context. There's also information in there which controls how things look differently according to the writing script version So whether it's done in an Arabic kind of script or whether it's done in a Latin type of script. And within each of those scripts you can subdivide your feature tables down to a specific language. So if inside your Arabic you've got a Farsi version of your feature tables, then you can specify that in your OpenType font. What we do in APP is allow users to specify the feature table. If they want to specify a script, then they can do that, and if they want to specify a language, they can do that as well. We make available all the feature tables which are in the OpenType fonts. We don't just keep it to old style numbers and fractions and small caps. Like some other applications, we allow users to access any and every of the feature tables which are available in the fonts. We don't make them up. If the feature tables aren't in the font, we're not going to magically create small caps, for example. So it's up to the users to know whether those feature tables are in the font. And to help people do that, we've provided a library with a little dialog box in it which helps you to examine those fonts. I can show you that if you like. Here we go. So there's an OpenType tools library, and in there's a feature table viewer. If you pop that one open, you can select, for example, this font, and it'll show you which scripts are available. If I select default, these feature tables are available. If I select Arabic, then these languages are available within the Arabic script type, and then I can select, for example, Moroccan or Malay, and I can see which feature tables are available within each of those languages. What it doesn't do, however, is generate the code to insert it, but there's FOM objects and properties now which allow you to specify and stack as many of these feature tables as you like on top of your current formatting. One thing I would say about OpenType is that when you turn it on in your style, things will look different from normal APP or layout developer word shaping. We're using a different library to shape the words. So once OpenType is on, don't expect line endings to be exactly the same. They will wrap slightly differently because we're using a different engine to shape the words. If you want to keep things the way they are, just don't turn on OpenType. If you want to make use of the OpenType stuff, turn it on in your style, and then you can call the different feature tables as you will. Everything else works the same. You can set style, all the coloring and text decoration stuff that you like on top of that stuff. Hand in hand with that, because OpenType specifies a glyph that you want to output rather than a character inside Unicode, we have a tool which we provide with this library to allow you to preview the glyphs which are in a font. So I can select, let's get rid of that. I can select this font in the startup dialog box, and then you can see which glyphs appear at which position inside the font. So here you can see that there's lots of different variations of this character. If you want to output one specifically, then there's a method to call this specific glyph. Normally you won't want to do that, but sometimes you might want to do it to test whether things are working properly. What else can I tell you about OpenType? So, as I said, there's over 100 different feature tables. We make available the ones which are inside the fonts, and there's methods and properties that allow you to set that stuff quite easily inside a formatting object model inside your templates. So you can now access anything and everything to do with OpenType fonts. So the next main feature that we're shipping in this release is support for the Mathjax JavaScript library. So for those who don't know, Mathjax is a set of JavaScript scripts which work inside a browser to render and convert MathML and Tech and some other math description languages into SVG or other types of output. what we've done in this release is provide a set of tools which allow you to go from Tech or MathML to SVG. We ship a version of the Mathjax library, the latest one that we could get hold of, and a set of tools that we've written to do that conversion for you. To enable this inside your template, you need to be able to associate a namespace. For those template developers out there, you need to associate a namespace and then use a method which will convert a string that you give it which contains MathML or Tech, and what it will return is an SVG graphic which you can then place anywhere in your document how you wish. It's quite a powerful tool. Let me just open up the sample file while I'm talking, and it will cope pretty well with any of the maths that we throw at it so far. The advantage of it being SVG is that it's scalable, so you can zoom in. So this picture down here is a screenshot, and you can see the lines are nice and smooth. You can zoom in quite close to it and it all renders nicely rather than generating a bitmap graphic like some other tools do. So let me see if I can get this sample working properly. So here on screen, let's get everything sort of shrunk down a bit. Here on the screen, I've got some MathML, and what's being displayed here is an SVG based on it. For those old 3v2 users, you'll remember we had a MathML library. This is basically a version of that with the graphics that we got based on Elsevier Science's requirements. If I make a change to this and refresh it, you can see that the graphic gets redrawn again instantaneously, and you can see the output of it. So Mathjax is doing that in the background for us and giving us the SVG that we want. If you want to use in the future a different version of the Mathjax library, we'll make sure that we support it going forward. And I believe there's a new version of it coming out soon, which will have some enhancements in it. So we'll make sure that that works properly. The other thing I'm working on at the moment for you Styler users out there is a way of using this inside Styler as well. So you can hopefully be able to just use a property set to call your maths, and it would output the SVG for you in line. I haven't done that yet. I'm working on it now, and as soon as I got it available, if you want it and are interested in it, send me an email and I'll send the sample over to you. So that's the Mathjax stuff. And a layout developer release wouldn't be complete without some debugger enhancements. So layout developer's external debugger is a tool which allows you to not only create template code, but also to debug that template code and step through it and find out where everything's going wrong. In this release, we've got three main new interfaces that we're providing to help people develop their templates. We chose these three because they historically have been difficult to code by hand. You'd have to write like keyword and value pairs in a control stream to make these things work, and there's a little bit hit and miss. So what we've done is provide interfaces to allow you to do this a lot more easily. So the first one is an interface for context control streams. Context control streams allow you to associate some code, whether it's APP or layout developer template code or some JavaScript or whatever, with a context in your XML file. So you could say, using like an XSLT selector, you can say, I want for my first title inside a chapter, apply this bit of code. The control streams to create that stuff was kind of a bit verbose and a bit awkward. So what we've done in this release is provide a way of creating those contexts nice and easily, but also to be able to associate code in different ways in a nice way. So you can build up your different contexts, and you can either associate a tag using a drop-down, or you can write JavaScript in there directly using a version of the JavaScript editor that we got. The other one that we're providing is the page sequence control stream editor. So again, page sequence control streams were things which were written by hand. You had to remember what each of the number of values meant, whether it meant odd or even pages or left or right hand pages, or whether it had content on it or not, and how you would associate your page layouts with the context which matched. So in this release we've got a nice little UI which will allow you to do that a lot more easily. You'll be able to create your conditional page sequences nice and easily, and you'll be able to say which layout to apply. Finally, in the debugger world, we've got this idea of stored object manager. So stored objects in Layout Developer allow you to create inside your template persistent objects which represent things like styles and blocks and paragraphs and table cells and that kind of thing. Historically, they haven't been savable within your template, but with stored objects, you can save them inside your template and reuse them as many times as you like. What this does is reduces the amount of code that you have to write when you're creating your template. So if you use stored objects, you can create all your styles up front, save it inside your template, and then just call it by name rather than running 20, 30, 40 lines of JavaScript code every time you want to create a paragraph or change the style, for example. We have historically hidden those objects away from the debugger because what Layout Developer does is create a JSON object in the background, which is difficult to read. But because the debugger can understand the JavaScript objects a lot more nicely, we've put an interface on top of that which allows you to see them, and you can change the styles quite easily. Let me see if I can get a sample up while I'm talking to show you how that works. So
just really quickly, you've got a few minutes warning here.
Okay, I've only got a couple more things to do. There it is. Let's get rid of that. So here's my sample. If I bring up the debugger, so over here is my object. I want to change the main title, and if I go to the default style, I can change the color to something like red, and if I refresh, it changes it there. So this interface here is looking at the stored object which is stored inside the template and allowing you to change it a lot more easily than you could before. So that's that one, and then the final thing, the last thing, is this idea of taking the blue bar in the Layout Developer, which is this area over on the left. Let me get up this example, go to page mode. So this area on the left historically has been quite a basic tool. It's either listed the layers which are on a page, or it's listed some tag types. What we've done is made that more dynamic, so users can now create custom versions of this, associate different styling with it and different actions with each of the items within that list. So in this example here, I've got an interface which lists the pages, which lists the frames on the current page. If I page down, it will refresh and show me some different ones. If I select a frame, it will highlight the one which is selected, and then I can see the information about that frame. This is something I just created as a demo. You can write your own, put any amount of information in there that you like. What this uses is this custom blue bar code, but it also uses something which we've introduced called template events, and these template events allow you to trigger some JavaScript code for any of these events here. So if you change the document working mode, if you change the edit bar, if you change page, the selected frame, and all these other things here, they will kick off a bit of JavaScript code which can be used to change the blue bar, or it can be used to do anything else that you want. So if you wanted to create a report every time you save, then you can do that. Or if you wanted to update a page every time you page down, create a report about that page, then you can do that too with the page changed event. So hopefully people will find that useful for doing their customized UIs inside Layout Developer. I know there's a lot of people out there who have heavily customized the UI of Layout Developer, so this might be an extra tool to allow them to do stuff which is a bit more dynamic in using that blue bar, which is kind of laid a little bit redundant for a while. So that's everything I have for version 12. If you've got any questions about that, drop me a line.